the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. For over 35 years, the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum has interpreted Canada's proud aviation history through the restoration and preservation of its outstanding collection of military aircraft and other artifacts, and gained international acclaim for its vintage aircraft flying program. In 1970, pilots Dennis Bradley and Alan Ness were discussing their love of aviation and their desire to maintain and preserve Canada's aviation history. They formulated a plan to preserve in flying condition some of the training and combat aircraft flown by RCAF pilots during World War II.
We decided to purchase an airplane, and in researching the market, decided on Firefly, the same as this airplane behind me. We recruited two other gentlemen, John Weir and the late Peter Matthews, and bought the airplane down in the United States, brought it back to Canada, and restored it at Toronto Airport.
Major restoration work began in 1971, and after hundreds of hours of volunteer labor, the Ferry Firefly was test flown the following year. This aircraft forms the central figure on the museum's advertising and is incorporated into its crests and logo. In 1972, the group moved into part of Hangar No. 4 at the Hamilton International Airport in Mount Hope, Ontario. The group started to seek out other restoration projects.
We had a couple of aircraft donated by John Weir, and decided at that time to form the museum. And the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum was formed in 1972.
A Harvard Mark IV was the group's second restoration, followed shortly after by others, including the de Havilland Chipmunk, a Tiger Moth, and a North American Yale. Hangar No. 3 was purchased a few years later for restoration and maintenance work. Finally, the aircraft collection and the volunteers had a home. The group applied for charitable foundation status under the name Canadian Warplane Heritage. Meanwhile, much interest was being shown in the group's activities by other aviation enthusiasts, and so a membership program was started. The Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum's aim is the preservation, restoration, and display of a collection of aircraft that are of significant importance to Canada's aviation history. Wherever possible, these aircraft are restored and maintained in flying condition.
Okay, MGI, we're just going to go up to 4,000 feet. We'll level at 4. Okay, I got the lead.
Each year, we were able to put most of the airplanes up in the air and display them at various air shows around the area within a 200-mile radius. So we take the artifacts to the public for them to see, and it's very exciting to see these airplanes in the air, to hear the sounds, and to know what they represent historically.
Number 3. Okay, yellow section, break.
About half of its current collection of nearly 40 aircraft are able to fly, which makes the museum unique in Canada, if not in North America. Just to maintain these historic aircraft in flying condition takes about 4,000 hours of volunteer labor each year.
The restoration on these airplanes is due mainly to our volunteer organization, and the growth of the museum over the years is attributable to a large extent to the volunteer base that we have. Over the years, that volunteer base has grown fairly consistently, and even today, the aircraft that you see in the collection here are maintained to a great extent by volunteers.
The acquisition and restoration of the B-25 Mitchell bomber began in 1975, when the collection took over more of Hangar 4. During that same year, the Westland Lysander and Cessna Crane joined the museum's collection. Tragedy struck in 1977. Alan Ness lost his life when the Ferry Firefly he was piloting at the Canadian International Air Show crashed into Lake Ontario. Since that time, Ness's memory is honored through the annual award of the Alan Ness Memorial Trophy to a deserving museum member or group. After this great loss, the group remained undaunted and replaced the Fairey Firefly with another. The museum's most ambitious restoration project has been the Avro Lancaster bomber. This aircraft, mounted on a pedestal, stood guard over the Royal Canadian Legion in Goderich, Ontario, for a number of years, but it was gradually deteriorating. With help from the Sully Foundation, the Lancaster was acquired by the museum in 1977. Over the next 2 years, a tremendous amount of work was required to remove the Lanc from its concrete pedestal and prepare it for transportation to Hamilton. The Canadian Forces 450 Helicopter Squadron accepted the challenge of airlifting this large aircraft as a training exercise. After the Chinook helicopter brought the Lancaster to the museum in 1979, the restoration work began. Nearly 10 years of volunteer effort was needed to complete this enormous project before this aircraft was ready to fly. The restored aircraft was named in honor of Victoria Cross winner Andrew Mynarski, who died trying to save the life of the rear gunner when his Lancaster was shot down. Attending the dedication ceremony were all surviving crew members of that crash. The museum's Lancaster took to the air before a crowd of over 20,000 spectators on September 24, 1988. Unfortunately, a devastating fire destroyed a large part of Hangar 3 on February 15, 1993. Included in the destruction were the administration offices, engineering records, and all ground and maintenance equipment. Among the aircraft lost were a Hawker Hurricane and a submarine Spitfire.
About half the hangar burned down, and we lost 5 aircraft in that on that tragic day. The Lancaster happened to be stored in the one half of the hangar that wasn't damaged by fire, and we were able to get it out without any damage.
The fire spread quickly through the north side of the building. Volunteers who arrived to give assistance could only watch helplessly as the fire blazed only a few feet away from the Avro Lancaster. Also saved were 2 other restoration projects, the Bristol Bolingbroke and the Fleet Finch. With the support of all 3 levels of government, the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum Group battled back to design and build a 108,000 square foot delta-shaped building. The museum's new quarters were officially opened on April 26, 1996. Attending the opening was the museum's patron, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. The new museum houses all operations under one roof, including the restoration, the artifact exhibit, offices, and aircraft displays. Membership in the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum is open to all who share an interest in aircraft preservation. Funding for the museum projects comes mainly from membership fees, private donations, and sponsorships. The Ontario government, through the Ministry of Citizenship, Culture and Recreation, supports the museum with an operating grant. The Canadian government has recognized the importance of preserving certain aircraft of outstanding historical significance by certifying Canadian Warplane Heritage as a cultural property institution. The museum now houses over 40 aircraft, an extensive aviation exhibit gallery, a library, and a gift shop. Special events take place throughout the year, and the facilities, including the main aircraft exhibit area, can be rented for private events. Group tours of the facility, with the services of an experienced tour guide, are available to groups who make prior arrangements. Many of the visiting groups are students learning the theory of flight, aircraft design, and military history. A visit to the museum enhances many areas of provincial school curriculum.
We have school tours and educational programs for these schools that bring in close to 20,000 students a year. These young people go home and, of course, tell their parents about the wonderful place they've been to. They come out to the museum, and some of those people become volunteers, become members, and we continue to grow and to pursue our objectives. These airplanes are a memorial to all the veterans who flew in World War II. Every day here is Remembrance Day, and it's very important to us in our mandate to preserve these aircraft in flying condition as an honor, as a memory, and to remember the veterans who served and preserved our freedom.
The Belt of Orion Award of Excellence was presented to the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum at ceremonies held in Toronto, May 28, 2008.